What is going on, YouTube? This is Jim back with another video here to give you guys my final thoughts, my really late to the review backlog of Final Fantasy 15. Now, I will be getting into some spoilers, but it won't be till later on in the video. I will tell you when that happens. I suspect if you are watching this video now, sometime in October of 2020, you have either beaten the game and you're curious what other people think about it, or you are never going to play it and you just want to know what the story's about. I mean, I guess there's a possibility that somebody does watch this that still wants to play the game that hasn't yet had an opportunity to do so, but whatever. So let's get into the spoiler-free part first, and then I'm going to dive into the spoiler section later, and I will tell you when that happens. So Final Fantasy is a very important franchise to me personally. I have very fond memories of playing Final Fantasy 2 and Final Fantasy 3 here in America. I know that they're numbered elsewhere if you look at them holistically. On my Super Nintendo Entertainment System. My favorite Final Fantasy ever is Final Fantasy 2. I love Kain. He is one of the coolest characters I think I've ever met. And one of the things that Final Fantasy really just did so well was it created such a vibrant, fantasy-filled world, good to their name, that really made you believe everything you were seeing was totally plausible. And, you know, in a world of Final Fantasy II where they had airships and magic crystals that were imbued with different parts of elemental powers, and you had all of these weird characters with larger-than-life stories diverging and intersecting, coming and going, joining the party, leaving, dying, whatever. It always felt like it made sense. And that has carried through every Final Fantasy through 7, through 10, through 10-2, Lightning Returns, and now Final Fantasy 15. They have done it again. They have maintained a way for you to feel the fantasy in Final Fantasy. So the fact that it takes place in a modern day where people are driving cars, where there is electricity, where you're living in a major city and you have cell phones and you have normal problems that people would experience in 2020 pre-COVID, it's totally plausible that there would be a kingdom and a king living in this really tall skyscraper in the middle of a major metropolitan area, and people would revere him as the king, and he would have magical powers because it just makes sense. The art, the music, the character names, the character style, all just fit into this perfect narrative. And through my 20 or so hour playthrough of the Golden Path, I can honestly say that everything I saw, whether it was chocobo riding or driving around in the regalia or fighting giant scorpions or cobras on the side of the road, it all just felt very natural, and it all felt totally like, yeah, I get that. Understandably, for some people who are not familiar with JRPGs, I totally understand people might look at this and go, whoa, that is not for me. But I'll say that if you are willing to kind of put your expectations of what is normal, if you're willing to put that to the side and you just go for the ride, you're going to have a blast with this game. And I did too. I really, really enjoyed the theme, and I really enjoyed a lot of the plot. Not all of it, a lot of it though. And I really felt connected to the characters. By the end of the game, I could tell you, you know, the four main characters that you play with pretty much exclusively through the game. Noctis, Gladius, Prompto, Ignis. I can tell you their likes, their dislikes, their hopes, their dreams, their fears, their personalities. Because as this adventure goes through, these guys are always together, and they make small talk constantly. It's not just when you're driving from point A to point B. Sure, you could fast travel. But driving that distance in the Regalia, whether you're doing it yourself or Ignis is driving because he likes to drive, um, they talk. They have a great way. They have banter. They talk about things that they saw. They talk about experiences that you have done as the player. They talk about other things. It's like as they're driving down the road, they might see something like, hey, do you remember that time? And they all laugh and talk about it. And you just feel like you're part of the group. You feel like you're this imaginary fifth best friend sitting in the back seat, right next to Gladius and Noctis, just kind of with your arms around them, like, what's going on, guys? And you just feel that way through the entire game. And it's a very heartwarming tale of these friends really overcoming some pretty insane odds in an effort to try to save the world, essentially. Yes, there are some very odd divergence in the story. One of my major criticisms with the character development that I loved oh so much was that this game was originally released with a big portion of the story missing, and it was available only later as DLC. There's a lot of people who played the game originally looking at it and saying, that didn't make a whole lot of sense. And then somebody like me, who's playing it, much, much later, looking at it going, oh, this makes sense. Like, the story's explained. What don't you understand? And I realize now it's that this game came out largely broken, largely incomplete. So depending on when you played it, you may have a different experience than I did. But other than this breaking out of all this DLC with some pretty significant major events in these character lives, for the most part, the story does make a logical sense and flow, and you see the rise and fall of heroes and villains, and it makes logical sense, and you do get invested. I did. I know I definitely did. I was really curious to see how everything was going to play out, and I will admit, as with most video games, when I did beat it, I did definitely tear up a little bit. It did hit me in the feels for sure, especially towards the last, maybe 30 minutes. 'Cause very long cutscene at the end, which I think really frames everything. So just in the plot, in the setting, in the pacing, in the overall feel of the game, it absolutely hits a home run, no doubt about it. But unfortunately, that is not, always front and center. There's a lot of this game that revolves around exploration and revolves around combat. That's really one of the staples of a Final Fantasy game, is exploring dungeons and going off in different areas to see what's out there and to how you fight, which usually is like a turn-based system, sometimes like in Final Fantasy VII, which I will be playing and talking about in the future, but I know what the game is about, obviously, because I've played the original. It's a little bit more active combat instead of like, okay, I hit you, now I wait, now you hit me, now I wait. It's a little bit like take that convention and throw it out the window for Final Fantasy 15. This is a full-blown action game like a Zelda game or like God of War or like a very, almost like a button masher in a sense. The problem is they've dumbed it down so far. The game practically plays itself. So you hit on the PlayStation, you press and hold circle to attack. And you will just auto attack. That's it. You can hit the right trigger if you want to aim at something. You don't have to. You'll just swing until whatever. You also have a guard button, which on PlayStation is square. That's your two buttons. Now you do get this teleport ability where you can warp strike to people quickly. And if you hit them from behind, it's considered a blind side, which gives you a little bit more damage. But for the most part, you're holding circle and then, oh, he's about to hit me, I better hit square. Now I'm holding circle again. And you feel very disengaged from the combat as a result. There's not really a lot of requirements of you to do anything. In other Final Fantasy games where you had to manage like putting the tanks out in front and they had to have the best armor and you had the healers in the back supporting you and you had the black mages as artillery and you had everybody had a distinct role. In this game, you're holding circle. While you're doing this, the three other characters that are following you for most of the adventure, they're just auto-attacking wildly too. Magic is an afterthought in this game. You can craft your own spells, but it's a very basic system of fire, ice, lightning, all the really cool spells that made up a lot of the older Final Fantasies like healing spells and confuse and poisons and cures and walls and meteor and all this stuff is a demi. It's all gone. It's all gone. It's just these three basic spells. That's it. And they're on a cooldown. So magic's going to be an afterthought. Gear, very similarly too, you're going to select the weapon and an accessory. But you're not going to be able to pick different pieces of armor for your character like you did in other Final Fantasies where you can start to equip different parts. And the accessories are very basic. Some of the accessories will do things like give you a little bit of health or give you a little bit of magic, but not radically change the way your character plays. Definitely not something like, really dating myself here, back to Final Fantasy 3, like when you had like the offering and the Genji glove, for example, where like you could make a two-handed tank that hit everybody 4 times with dual-handed weapons or something really cool like that. Or you want to give a character a significant amount of fire resistance against the fire boss, or you want to have a character just stacked on HP. You don't really get that kind of option in this game, and it really does suffer from that. So as I was saying in the first part of this review, you know, the world that they build up, this exciting universe and this weird fantasy that they have employed throughout everything, it does kind of play against itself when you get into the gear, because the gear is just so uninspiring. The combat is incredibly uninspiring. And the really cool things about Final Fantasy have been stripped away from this game. Collecting summons, for example. I mean, how cool is it in Final Fantasy VII when you would blow out like Knights of the Round Table? And you can cast it whenever you want to. It took a long time. It took a lot of magic, sure. But boy, when you pulled that thing off and you got this awesome cutscene of all the knights coming down and each one of them blasting at an enemy, usually for like 9999 damage. How cool is that? Or when Bahamut comes down, or when Ifrit comes down, or you name it. There's a lot of really cool summons in the old Final Fantasies. In this game, the summons are story pieces, and they are used at very specific times in very specific boss battles, and they're all rendered in terms of what the cutscene is. They're cool, but you don't control when they come, and when they come, it's programmed basically what they're gonna do. So it's not like, man, we're about to die. I got one last chance to defeat this enemy. I'm going to give my last character just a little bit of ether, so they're going to drink it, and they're going to cast the summons and hope we win. And then you all go nuts when, like, you know, Quetzalcoatl comes down and blasts everybody with lightning or something, or Ixion comes down and just like smokes everybody. That would be fun, right? Nope. Not in this game. In this game, it'll just tell you like, hey, you have to summon now. Hey. And it's like blinking in your face. You're like, oh, okay. Then you hit it, and then a cutscene will play, basically, and you'll watch the summon interact and defeat the enemy. And it just really removes itself from this magic entirely. And in such a cool, inspired world where, as I said, you have characters fighting in, you know, holding cell phones and fighting with swords and fighting mythical beasts on the side of the road, where nighttime is evil, but daytime is just a fun festival, music and street food and fairs and fun and crafting. The combat just, like, it kills the experience because it's always front and center. No matter how cool the characters are talking, unfortunately, you have this combat system which just drags it down. I didn't like that, clearly. The other thing I'll mention, spoiler free, and then we'll jump into a couple major story points that I think are definitely worth discussing. I loved how the game basically told the story using the characters as a guide almost. So, for example, Prompto, which was one of the coolest ideas in the game, honestly. You know, a lot of these games have they have story modes. They have photo modes where you could freeze the action, like Ghost had a phenomenal photo mode. You could pause it, zoom in, you can make it raining, you can make it light, whatever. You were playing, but you had to stop the action to basically frame a shot and take it. In this game, Prompto is a photographer, among other things. And he takes photos of you during all your fights. So when you get to the end of a level or a chapter or some major resting point in the game, and you set up camp, because Gladios likes to set up the camp, and you're setting up the camp, and Ignis likes to cook, so he cooks up something for you that will give you some sort of physical or magical buff leading into the next part of the adventure. Prompto will pull out his camera, and you can look at all the photos he's taken. And they're all, now some of them are definitely like like pre-rendered photos in the sense that like when you meet major characters, for example, but a lot of them are just like natural, like unique to your specific game. And they're not actual photos like from his point of view where like he was taking a camera. Sometimes it'll be like all your characters standing with their arms around each other in front of like a scene that you saw earlier in the game. Or it'll be a combat scene of like you drinking a health potion or you like hitting an enemy for the final hit or the summons coming down. And all the characters will talk about these photos in between the games. So it's like, oh, I remember when we did that. And that plays a big role in kind of the end part of the game where you have these memories that you have built of your adventure and you can save them. They're very easy to share online. You can do little photo editing stuff to them at the end, but it's so cool that a character is almost like self-reflecting of what they're seeing in the game. And it really does kind of put a nice little capstone on each set of missions where, you know, while you're fighting a boss and it's frantic, there might be guys behind you doing something else or fighting some other enemy, or sometimes you guys get split from the party. And during these times when everybody gets together and they relive some of these moments through the photos, it's very touching. And you really start to feel the life being breathed into these characters, which I just thought was a really, really cool touch. So with that, I'm going to stop the spoiler-free portion. You guys have been warned. I'm going to talk about spoilers in a few seconds. So if you don't want to see it, that's it. For everybody else, let's dive right in. There were, as I mentioned in the first part of this video, there was definitely a lot of areas where the story didn't make sense. And we now know it was because of a lot of the DLC, the episode of the character's name, Gladiolus, Prompto, Ignis, whatever. The problem was when you're playing through these, you don't want to necessarily stop the main story to go play the DLC and come back. And a lot of these very, not inspirational, very significant moments are incredibly diminished. The one that stands out that made me laugh out loud, literally laugh out loud, was towards the end of the game when you are separated from your crew and you find out that Prompto is actually a cloned Magitech Knight. He's not even a human being. He's like this weird cloned version of his master loaded. You don't find all that till you play the DLC. What you get in the main story is, hey guys, you need to get in this door. Well, all the enemies have chips programmed into their arms to open the door. And then he goes over and he uses his arm and the door opens. And then everyone's like, how did you do that? And he's like, guys, there's something I gotta admit. I'm a robot. And they're like, okay, cool. You're one of us. And that was it. There was no other discussion about it. And it was so weird. Now, I get it. We got this JRPG thing going on. There's definitely some odd things happening. But are you serious? Like, that is such a significant moment. Your childhood friend is basically a converted bad guy. And he grew up befriending you and becoming one of you. And he didn't even know he wasn't one until later on. And he's going to basically blow this giant reveal in 2 sentences? Get out of here. It was really bad. There's a lot of writing in there that just didn't make sense. And I don't know if it was a time crunch from Square Enix or if they had bigger visions for this game and they had to be downscoped at the last second. But there's a lot of characters that you meet in here that are totally irrelevant to the story. Gladiolus' sisters, perfect example. You spend a lot of time getting to know her. They even kind of insinuate that you kind of like her as Noctis, even though that you're going to marry Lady Lunafreya. So you kind of like this girl, you kind of don't. It's almost like a love triangle is starting to form. And then poof, she's out of the story, never to be mentioned again. You have that little kid, Tennyson, I think, Tennyson, or Talcott. He's the little boy, and then his uncle dies, and then you meet him later, and he's like, hey, you remember me? I'm the little kid you met a long time ago, and, you know, things have really changed, and then you can, like, talk to him to catch up on what Noctis has been missing. This is after the 10-year time jump. You could talk to him and see what he's missing, and all the conversations are really lighthearted, like, oh, yeah, you know, things are good, you know, this is what I've been up to, and your friends are fine. And then there's one option, and then the music changes, and he gets really sad. He's like, yeah, my uncle died. He, you know, basically had the most horrific, bloody, merciless death ever. And then it's like, whoa. And then the music picks back up and he's like, anything else you want to ask me about? And I'm like, I feel like that character probably had more dialogue or something and they pulled it out at the last second because it just didn't make sense. And there's a lot of these tangential characters you meet that are really irrelevant, that don't really play into the story, that just don't really seem to be very fleshed out. I know at the very end of the game, Square Enix put out a survey and said, of all the characters you've met, who do you want to see more DLC for? And of course, everybody picks the main villain. And you get a little bit more story of him, which they did include a canon and a non-canon ending, which was kind of neat. But they really, it's like they didn't have enough time to finish with everybody else. Like Core, you're the, basically like the Royal Guard. That guy was a badass. You get to play with him early on. He's smoking people, and then he's gone. You never see him again. You had the hireling, the woman you fight early on, and she was working with the Empire. She was really evil. She was no good. And then suddenly she's your friend, and then she's gone. And the list goes on. I can name 10 more characters like this. But the point is, that was incredibly jarring to the experience. And I think that was probably my biggest frustration outside of the combat, was just how bad some of these tangential stories were. I did read about them online because, like I said, I did do the Golden Path. So I was trying to read through it on Wikipedia to see if like I had missed anything. Was there a side quest that better fleshes out these characters? And the answer is no, they're not. So maybe it was a huge vision by the creators of Final Fantasy, and then unfortunately things had to change and decisions had to be made, and they didn't do a good job of cleaning it up. I don't really know. But it turned out to be incredibly frustrating. And I think the story suffers greatly because on your first playthrough, you're going to be like, wait, Gladiolus is going to leave now? Like right in the middle, this guy, he's sworn to me to be the king's guard. And in the middle of like the shit hitting the fan, this guy's going to be like, hey, I got a thing to do. See you later. Now, obviously, you go play his DLC. He comes back. He's all scarred up. They never explain that in the story. You have to play the DLC to figure out where he went and why he went in this challenge, which makes him stronger. It was just very bizarre. So for as many moments as they do like that, they also do really cool moments. Like when there's major story beats and you'll get a huge expansion, not expansion, you get a huge upgrade in a particular stat, or you'll unlock some new weapon. That was really cool. Like there's a part in the story where Noctis is fighting something and you know, he has to like use a lot of resolve to win. And then at the end, like a little box pops up and it's like, due to the previous battle, Noctis now believes in himself, maximum HP increased by 20%. I was like, that's actually a really cool idea. Let's let characters tell the story, which goes back to what I said earlier in the in the spoiler-free section, where yes, let's have characters, let's be them. Let's experience their strengths, their weaknesses, their hopes, their dreams, and build it into the mechanics of the game, like with Prompto and his photography, or picking up ingredients. And Ignis is like, hey, I can make that. I can make a food for you. I want to cook. I'm a cook. Let's make stuff. And those are cool character buffs. And you see the cutscenes where they're talking about how he cooked it and the ingredients. That's fun. But you get these weird tangential pieces that just totally ruin a lot of the experience. And I was not happy about that. Another big point that I was really frustrated with, I think, was the kind of ham-fisted ending. I did really enjoy the final cutscenes. I thought they were phenomenal. But the fact that, you know, you are the king of kings, you are the true blood, the royal blood. That boss battle went way too long with Ifrit both times. Way too long. And it was so boring. You fought him, then all the summons come down, Bahamut comes down, and then Ifrit pops back up and he magically has all his HP again, and you have to fight him again. Then you go fight Arden, and you have to fight him like 6 more times, and then you use all the weapons to finally kill him. It was like, enough already. And I get it. They want this huge sense of scale, you know, the pure good versus the pure evil. They're finally clashing at the end, but it just didn't feel warranted based on the fact that you weren't leveling up your character along the way in terms of like stats and armor that I had mentioned previously. More in this terms that like you were just holding circle longer now than you did 5 minutes ago. It didn't feel very deserved. I think back to like Final Fantasy VII, for example, when you face off against Sephiroth at the end, when you're with Cloud, and it's just one-on-one at the very end, and you are a badass. You've got really good gear. You've got really good weapons. You are totally equipped to take him out, and you have these monstrous long fights between each other one-on-one. That was cool. I like that. That felt warranted. This ending didn't really feel like deserved. It felt like it was just like, oh yeah, we got to end the game now, but we got to really convey to you how bad the villain is, so we're going to have you fight him for like 30 minutes. It just seemed a little off to me. Other than that, I know I'm really kind of crapping on the game. The fantasy element just really just solidifies how beautiful of a game this was. And I know this game could be so much better than it was. But the story was really endearing. I really did feel for the characters. I wish I had a little bit more customization with the summons and with the gear. And I feel like the story was very disjointed at times. But I think it was a worthy entry in the Final Fantasy series. And I'm definitely eager to see what Square Enix has next. I think they have a good idea on their hands of blending modern and ancient times into one to release a really fun and exciting experience. My hope is that maybe they can stick the landing a little better next time. So there you guys have it, a pretty lengthy review of Final Fantasy 15. This game means a lot. This series means a lot to me. And I wanted to do it justice, so I wanted to kind of walk through my entire thoughts. If you made it all the way to the end, good job. I appreciate your guys' support. I'm going to be jumping into Final Fantasy VII Remake next, and I will definitely be doing a long video on that because that game influenced me in ways, well, you're going to have to wait and see how it influenced me. With that, I'm closing out this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.